2 years, 700 and some days, and not one word out of her. Spencer Holloway had counted them the way other men count their money, which was a thing he also knew how to do. And on the afternoon this all begins, he was down on his knees on the carpet of a public library in Camp Washington, a man worth more than every house on that block put together, begging a 7-year-old to please just look at him. Wren wasn't looking at him. Wren was screaming. Not the regular kind. The kind that comes up from a place under the lungs, where breath goes when a child decides the world is too loud and too bright and too full of hands, and the only thing left to do is make a sound big enough to drown all of it. Her hands were over her ears. Her heels were drumming the floor. A librarian was already moving toward them, with that particular dread librarians get, and a teenager by the magazines had his phone half up, and Spencer was saying her name like it was a word he could spend his way out of. Then a woman 2 tables over set down a brass tuning fork, struck it once against the edge of the table, and pressed the stem flat against the wood. It hummed. Low. You couldn't really hear it over the screaming, but you could feel it if your hand was on that table, and Wren's hand was, and the screaming stopped like somebody had lifted a needle off a record. She turned. The little girl turned all the way around, eyes still wet, and stared at the woman's hand on the humming wood. There it is, the woman said, easy as anything. She didn't reach for the child, didn't smile too big. She just struck the fork again and let the table sing. You hear that, baby? That's a 440. Comes to visit anybody who sits real still. Wren sat real still. Spencer Holloway, on his knees, watched his daughter's shoulders come down from around her ears for the first time and he couldn't remember, and he felt something in his chest that he didn't have a line item for. Who are you? He said. The woman looked at him over a pair of reading glasses she hadn't bothered to take off. Nobody on the schedule, she said. I'm just here Saturdays. Then she went back to her fork and her humming, and that was the whole of it, far as she was concerned. What she didn't know, what Spencer didn't know, what nobody in that water-stained Little Branch library knew that afternoon, was that they had just lit the fuse on the worst decision Spencer Holloway would ever make. It would cost him more than the screaming had. It would cost more than the 2 years. And the funny thing, the thing you'll want to argue with later, is that he'd do it on purpose with his eyes open, because somebody in a good suit told him it was the responsible choice. But that's getting ahead. Let me back it up. Her name was Naomi Sinclair, and she clocked into nothing because nobody paid her. She just showed up. Every Saturday at 9, she rode the 17 bus from her apartment on Coleraine over to the Camp Washington branch, where she ran a thing she called Music Hour for any child, whose people couldn't afford the kind of music lessons that came with a parking lot. She was 61. She wore the same gray cardigan most weeks, and a pair of flat shoes that had given up their shape years ago, and the children called her Miss Naomi, and the staff called her Miss Naomi, and as far as the whole neighborhood was concerned, that's all she was, a kind old lady who could make a roomful of squirming kids go quiet with a kazoo and a hum. Here's what the neighborhood didn't know. 30 years before, Naomi Sinclair had run a clinic on the west side called the Obad Center, and at the Obad Center she had done things with music and silent children that got written up in journals with long words in the titles. She'd held an endowed chair. She'd trained doctors who were now famous. There was a framed thing somewhere in a closet in her apartment, a medal from a foundation that doesn't exist anymore, and she never took it out because the Obad Center had closed in 1994 when its funding got pulled out from under it by a hospital board that wanted the building for parking, and she had decided, after that she was done fighting men in rooms. She'd taught for a while. She'd retired quiet. Her husband, Curtis, had passed 4 winters back in his sleep, no drama, the way she'd always known a gentleman would go. And her son, well, her son was Julian, and Julian had been 9 when the leukemia took him, and that was 1970-something. And Naomi did not talk about Julian to anybody, ever, but she'll tell you, if you got her at the right hour, that you don't reach a hurting child with technique. You reach them with the part of you that got hollowed out and never filled back in. The technique is just the door. The hollow is the room. So she had her hollow, and she had her Saturdays, and lately she had a problem, which was that the city of Cincinnati had a budget, and the Camp Washington branch was at the bottom of it. There was a meeting coming. There was a vote. Word was the branch would close by fall, and music hour with it, and Naomi Sinclair, who had buried a husband and a son and a whole career, found that the thing she could not seem to make peace with at 61 was losing a Saturday morning with a bunch of borrowed children. Funny what the heart picks to hold on to. You don't get to choose it. Nobody does. 12 miles east in Indian Hill, where the houses sit so far back from the road you can't see them, and the silence is a thing people pay for, Spencer Holloway came home that night to a house built so that footsteps disappear. He was 50. He'd started Stillwater Equity Partners out of a spare bedroom and turned it into 9 figures of other people's money. And he'd married a woman named Annabeth who laughed with her whole face and who hummed when she did the dishes. And they'd had one daughter late, Wren, and for a while there, the disappearing Silence House had been the loudest place in Ohio. Then one Tuesday morning 2 years back, Annabeth had stood up from the breakfast table, said the light looked funny, and was gone before the ambulance turned off the main road. Aneurysm, 41 years old. 4 minutes, the doctor said, like that was supposed to be a mercy. Wren had been 5. Wren had been a chatterbox. Wren had not said a single word since the morning the light looked funny. Spencer had thrown money at it the way he threw money at everything, because money was the only language he was fluent in. There had been a clinic in Boston, and a clinic in Chicago, and a man who flew in from Zurich. There had been Margot Steeple, the in-home therapist from the agency, who arrived at 8 and left at 4, and wrote reports about Wren the way an auditor writes about a warehouse. There had been the Faircloth Institute, which is the part you need to remember, the gleaming private center with the waterfall in the lobby and the $11,000 monthly fee, run by a doctor. Roderick Faircloth, who had a TED Talk and a book and a way of saying, "Your daughter's plateau," that made it sound like Wren had personally chosen to stay silent out of spite. 2 years. The Zurich man alone had cost what a house costs. And on the Saturday I'm telling you about, the only reason Spencer Holloway and his daughter were in a leaking library in Camp Washington at all was that the air conditioning had died at the Faircloth Institute, and Wren had melted down in the parking lot, and Spencer had driven without aim until the rain started, and the first lit doorway he saw was a library, and he had carried his screaming child inside because he did not know what else in the world to do, and a woman with a tuning fork had done in 10 seconds what Zurich couldn't do in a year. He came back the next Saturday. He'll admit now it embarrassed him to do it. A man like him, sitting in a folding chair in a music hour for kids whose shoes didn't fit, watching a retired somebody hum at his daughter. But he came, and he sat, and he watched Wren inch her chair an inch closer to Miss Naomi over the course of an hour, and at the end of it, Naomi struck the fork and handed it, the actual fork, her own, to Wren, who closed her fist around it and pressed it to her own cheek to feel it die down. "She can keep that for the week," Naomi said. "Tools want using." He came the Saturday after that, and the one after. He started showing up other days, too, finding excuses, until Estelle Quigley, the head librarian, 65, built like a fire hydrant and twice as hard to move, who'd run that branch since Reagan, leaned over the returns desk one afternoon and said to Naomi, "That man in the good shoes has been here 4 days this week. He's got a hurting child," Naomi said. "Hurting brings people back." Estelle stamped a card harder than the card required. I looked him up. Estelle Holloway, Stillwater Partners. That's not library card money, baby. That's name on a building money. I don't need to look him up, Naomi said. He tips the snack jar a 20, and his little girl is starting to hum back. That's all the looking I need to do. Estelle made a sound that meant she'd let it go for now, and went back to her stamping, the way you do with a friend you can't talk sense into. Because here's a thing about Naomi Sinclair you should write down. She never asked Spencer Holloway who he was. She never Googled the man. She had spent her whole life around people who needed her to be impressed and had made a private religion out of declining. Wren wasn't a Holloway to her. Wren was a kid who'd lost her mother and locked the door behind the grief, and the locked door was the only thing in the room Naomi Sinclair cared to see. She did it the way she'd done it her whole life, Slow, no pressure, never reaching first. Week 1, the fork. Week 2, she brought a shoebox of textures, a square of velvet, a strip of corduroy, a smooth, flat creek stone, a swatch of sheepskin. Wren pressed her fingers into each one 100 times, learning them. Week 3, Naomi hummed while she worked, an old tune with no words to it, something her own mother had hummed over a washtub in a kitchen in Kentucky 60 years gone, and Wren's head tilted like a bird's, and by the end of the hour the child was humming it back. Off-key, hers, but the same shape, and here is the part nobody believes, so you can believe it or not. Spencer Holloway heard that hum, that wordless old tune, and the blood left his face, because Annabeth had hummed something like it, not the same song, but the same kind of song, the same low going-to-be-all-right shape, the thing Annabeth used to do over the dishwater that Wren had fallen asleep to as a baby. Two women who'd never met, 60 years and a whole world apart, humming the child toward the same door. You can call that coincidence. Spencer didn't. He sat in his folding chair in the leaking library and put his hand over his mouth and did not make a sound. It was around then he made the offer, and it's the offer that tells you everything about where he started from. He waited until the children cleared out one Saturday, and he stood up in his good shoes, and he took an envelope out of his jacket and set it on the table next to Naomi's fork. "I'd like you to come work with my daughter," he said. "Full-time, privately. Name your number." He nodded at the envelope. "That's to start the conversation." Naomi looked at the envelope the way you look at a thing on the sidewalk you're not sure is alive. She didn't open it. "How much is in there?" 50,000. She picked it up, felt the weight, set it back down, and slid it across the table to him with 2 fingers, the whole way back. "I don't take money I haven't earned, Mr. Holloway, and I haven't earned that." He blinked. People did not slide things back to Spencer Holloway. People asked for the bigger envelope. "I'm not. That's not me trying to buy you," he said. And for the first time, the smoothness cracked a little. "My daughter hasn't spoken in 2 years. I've paid every expert in the Western Hemisphere." She hummed at you. "I don't want to buy you. I'm asking you for help." And that, the asking, the actual naked asking, from a man clearly out of practice at it, landed where the envelope hadn't. "Sit down," Naomi said. "Not in the rich man chair. Here." And she pointed at the little plastic chair across from her, the kind built for second graders. And Spencer Holloway folded himself into it with his knees up around his ears, and they talked. She set the terms, all of them. "I don't move into your house. I keep my Saturdays here. This is mine. A trial. 6 weeks. I want to meet whoever's been working with her, and I want to see everything that's been tried, because I'm not going to march in there and undo somebody else's good work out of pride. And if Wren doesn't want me there, if she pulls back, if she shuts down, if she's worse with me than without me, I'm gone in a week. No check, no hard feelings. And you don't owe me a dime. And if she does want you there, then we figure out week 2. Estelle Quigley, listening from behind the returns desk where she'd been listening to the whole thing, dropped a stack of books loud enough to make a point. The house, when Naomi finally saw it, made her sad in a way she didn't say out loud, white and enormous and quiet as a held breath. No drawings on the refrigerator, no toys on the floor, a laminated schedule on the wall of Wren's room, every 15 minutes accounted for. 8 wake, 8:15 hygiene, 8:30 breakfast, like the child was a train. Margot Steeple met her at the door with a 3-inch binder and a face like a closed cabinet. "Everything's documented," she said. "Her routine is non-negotiable. Deviations cause regression. I've tracked every variable." Naomi took the binder, set it on the desk without opening it, and sat down on the floor in the middle of Wren's too-clean room and got out her shoebox and her fork. It went the way it went at the library, only faster, because the door was already cracked. Day 2 Wren followed her room to room, 5 feet back. Day 3 she was pressing her fingers into the creek stone in Naomi's lap. Day 4 Naomi got out a little keyboard, 1 octave, dollar store thing, and showed Wren that the fork's hum lived on one of the keys. And Wren pressed that key 40 times, then the one beside it, building herself a little staircase of sound. Day 6 they went to the grocery store, because the world has grocery stores in it whether you're ready or not, and on aisle 9 the lights buzzed wrong, and a cart crashed, and Wren went down with her hands over her ears, and Naomi sat right down on the linoleum next to her, didn't haul her up, didn't shush her, just struck the fork and pressed it to the cold floor so the hum came up through the tile. A woman down the aisle whispered to her friend, "Is that her grandbaby? Don't look like it." Naomi heard every word and did not so much as turn her head. Day 12. Spencer came home early. He'd been coming home earlier and earlier, 4:30, then 4, and found them at the kitchen island, Wren with a fat crayon in her fist, dragging blue across a sheet of paper in long, uneven strokes, her first drawing in 2 years. Naomi beside her, chin in her hand, watching like it was the only thing happening on earth. Wren looked up at her father and smiled. Spencer made it to the hallway before his legs went. He sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, the way you do when the thing you've held so tight for so long finally loosens an inch and the whole weight comes down at once, and he cried in a way grown men mostly only do once or twice in a life. Naomi heard him. She didn't go to him. Some grief you have to be let alone with. She picked up a crayon and drew a small bird next to Wren's blue scribble, and Wren studied it and then drew a line connecting her scribble to the bird, joining them. And that was a sentence if you knew how to read it. 6 weeks turned into the rest of the summer. Wren started pointing at things and waiting for Naomi to say the word window, water, dog, and moving her lips around the shapes, and some days the sound came and some days it didn't, but she kept trying. She slept through the night. Margot Steeple's daily reports got shorter because there's less to document about a calm child, and Margot's did not like that one bit, though she'd have died before saying so. And 11 miles east, in an office with a waterfall in the lobby, Dr. Roderick Faircloth was looking at his books and not liking what he saw either. The Holloway account was $11,000 a month, and it was about to walk out his door behind a library volunteer. Worse than the money, and the money was real, was the story. Faircloth had built an empire on the premise that children like Wren required Faircloth. The proprietary methods, the credentialed staff, the $11,000. If a 61-year-old woman with a tuning fork and no current license could do in a summer what the Institute couldn't do in a year, the premise had a hole in it, and a man's whole life can pour out of a hole like that. So Dr. Faircloth made some calls. He was good at finding out the shape of a person and then making the shape look like whatever he needed it to look like. Naomi Sinclair, it turned out, had a past, and a man like Faircloth knows how to hold a past up to a certain light. The Abad Center had closed in 1994. He didn't mention the parking lot, he mentioned shuttered. Her clinical license had lapsed in 2003. He didn't mention she'd retired. He mentioned no current credential to practice. There'd been a child at the Abad Center 30 years back who'd been injured in a fall during a session. Naomi hadn't been in the room. It had been ruled an accident. The family had sent her a Christmas card for a decade after. But a thing like that, printed cold on a page, just says child injured during Sinclair's care. And there was a photograph, because there is always a photograph. Faircloth had a man take it through the grocery store window. Naomi sitting on the floor of aisle 9, Wren curled in a ball beside her with her hands over her ears, fluorescent light making the whole thing look like the worst day of somebody's life. Out of context, it looked like neglect. Out of context, it looked like a child in crisis and an old woman just sitting there. Context, as Roderick Faircloth liked to say, was a service he provided. He didn't take it to Spencer. He took it to Stillwater's board, to 2 of the more nervous men who sat on it, the kind who managed other people's pensions and managed their own fear first. The memo was 2 paragraphs and it was surgical. Concerns regarding the founder's judgment. An unvetted, uncredentialed individual with a documented incident in her history granted unsupervised access to a vulnerable minor, the daughter and sole heir of the firm's controlling partner. Reputational exposure. Liability. He never had to say the part about Naomi being a black woman from the West Side and Wren being a white heiress in Indian Hill. The men he sent it to filled that part in themselves, in the quiet of their own heads, where it doesn't leave a record. And it worked. That's the thing about it. It worked. Spencer got a call from one of those nervous board members, then another, then a letter from Stillwater's counsel, using words like fiduciary and minor and exposure. Then Faircloth himself came to the house, unasked, with a man he introduced as a child welfare consultant and spread the file across the disappearing Silence Kitchen Island, the lapsed license, the shuttered clinic, the 30-year-old accident, and the photograph, printed full page, Wren on the floor, Naomi just sitting there. "I'm not your enemy, Spencer," Faircloth said, in the voice he used in his TED Talk. "I'm the man telling you the truth nobody else will. You've got your nonverbal, 7-year-old daughter, your only child, alone for hours a day with a woman who has no current license, a history of an incident, and significant, he let it sit, personal circumstances. If this ends up in a courtroom, or worse, in the press, your board will not stand behind you. I'm trying to protect you. And her." Spencer looked at the photograph a long time. He knew what had actually happened on aisle 9. He knew Naomi had gotten down on a filthy floor and put her own body between his child and a hard shelf and hummed until the storm passed. He knew, but the photo didn't show what he knew. The photo showed something else, and the men with the pensions had already decided what it showed, and for 1 second, just one. Sitting in his own kitchen with a fortune anything firm and a board and a roomful of fear pressing in on him, Spencer Holloway let the doubt in. That's all it takes. 1 second of letting it in. He called Naomi that night. 7:48. She was at the library, of all places, helping Estelle box up the children's section for the move that hadn't even been voted on yet, getting a head start the way she got a head start on everything. She stepped into the quiet of the stacks to take it. His voice was wrong. Flat. The boardroom voice, not the kitchen floor voice. "Naomi, I need to pause the arrangement." She set down the box of picture books she was holding. "Pause? Just temporarily. There are some concerns. About oversight. About credentials, liability, the whose concerns?" A silence. "Spencer, whose concerns? It's just for Wren's sake, until we get some things sorted out." For Wren's sake. Naomi Sinclair had heard that exact phrase, or its cousins, her whole long life. It was never about the person they named. It was always about the person on the line, too afraid to say what he actually meant. "All right," she said. "Naomi," I said, "all right." And she hung up and stood in the dark stacks with both hands flat on a cart of children's books, breathing slow, the way she'd taught 100 children to breathe, doing it for herself now because there was nobody else to do it for her. She went out to the estate one last time the next morning to get her things. The fork was Wren's now. She'd leave that. Her shoebox, her dollar keyboard, the creek stone. Margot Steeple held the door open and said nothing. Naomi stopped at the threshold and turned back into that big white quiet. "She was starting to make sounds, Spencer," she said. He was standing at the far end of the hall with his hands in his pockets, and he didn't move, and he didn't come closer. She was almost there. Then she walked out, and the door shut behind her, soft, the way expensive doors do. Upstairs, Wren stood at her bedroom window and watched the bus stop at the end of the long drive, and watched Miss Naomi get on it, and watched it pull away past the gate and the trees and out of sight. Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. And then everything came out. The scream, the deep one, the library one, the one from under the lungs, and it did not stop. Margot tried the headphones and the weighted blanket and the laminated card. None of it worked. None of it worked because the only thing that worked had just gotten on the 17 bus with a shoebox in her lap. Naomi went back to her Saturdays. Apron of dust, cardigan, flat shoes, boxing up a library that was closing anyway. She didn't talk about the Holloways, didn't mention Wren, but Estelle Quigley knew because Naomi had stopped humming. Whole summer the woman had hummed over the book carts, that old wordless Kentucky tune, and now the branch was silent, and Naomi's hands moved a little too fast, straightening shelves that were already straight. Estelle gave it 2 days. Then she locked the front door at closing, pulled a chair up across from her oldest friend, and said, "Talk." So Naomi talked, the man in the good shoes, the waterfall doctor, the photograph she'd never seen but could picture fine. And when she was done, Estelle Quigley sat back and said the truest thing anybody said in this whole business. "You know what makes me maddest? It's not even that he believed it. It's that believing it was the easy thing, and that man's never had to do a hard thing in his life that money could do for him instead." She reached across and put her hand over Naomi's. But that baby's gonna do a hard thing. That baby's gonna scream that house down. And a man can ignore a lot of things, Naomi. He cannot ignore his child screaming. She was right. She was right about all of it. It took Spencer 11 days. 11 days of his daughter not sleeping, not eating, not drawing, sitting at the window where the bus had disappeared, screaming until her voice went to gravel and then making no sound at all, which was worse. 11 days of Margot Steeple's reports getting longer again, full of variables, full of regression, full of the cold engineer's language that had never once helped his child. On the 11th night, Spencer Holloway sat on the floor of Wren's room with his back against her bed and finally did the thing he should have done at the start. He opened the file, not to read it the way Faircloth wanted it read, to check it. He was, when he remembered to be, a man who knew how to look at a set of books and find the lie in it. So he looked. The shuttered clinic had been defunded by a hospital board that wanted the land. There was a 1994 newspaper story about the parking lot and a quote from a doctor, now a department chair at a hospital Spencer had personally donated a wing to, calling the closure a disgrace to the city. The documented incident was a 30-year-old accident, ruled an accident, in which Naomi had not been present, and the injured child's mother had written a letter to the licensing board defending her so fiercely it was still in the file. The lapsed license was a retirement, and the child welfare consultant Faircloth had brought to his kitchen. Spencer made one call to a lawyer he trusted and learned the man wasn't a welfare anything. He was a reputation fixer, the kind of man you hire to make a person disappear, who'd done exactly that in 2 corporate cases Spencer could now suddenly remember reading about, and the photograph. Spencer pulled it back out and made himself look at it, and this time he saw what was actually in it. A woman who had gotten down on a filthy floor to put herself between a frightened child and the hard edge of the world. He'd been there. He knew. He'd let a man with a waterfall in his lobby tell him he hadn't seen what he'd seen. He didn't sleep. In the morning, he made some calls of his own. The Faircloth Institute had a board too, and a major donor, and the major donor was a foundation that Stillwater Equity Partners happened to anchor. Spencer's money, 3 steps removed, had been helping pay for that waterfall. It is a small world at the top, and the man who'd been used to it for 30 years finally used it on purpose. He sat down across a long table from Roderick Faircloth and the Institute's nervous board, and he laid out the 1994 newspaper story, and the mother's letter, and the lawyer's findings on the fake consultant, and the invoice trail showing that Faircloth had directed a private investigator using Institute resources to surveil and discredit a volunteer because she was outperforming an $11,000 a month program for free. "You took everything this woman survived," Spencer said, and his voice was very quiet, which is the voice you actually need to be afraid of. A clinic somebody stole from her, an accident she wasn't even in the room for, the fact that she got old and stepped back, and you sharpened it into a knife to protect your monthly fee. Not to protect my daughter. My daughter, you let scream for 11 days. He looked at the Institute's board. "I'm pulling the foundation's anchor funding, effective today, and I'm going to be telling the story of why to anyone who asks, and a lot of people are going to ask." Faircloth started to say something about how emotional this was, how Spencer wasn't thinking clearly, and Spencer let the silence sit on him until he stopped. Then Spencer stood up and buttoned his jacket and said the thing he'd driven over to say. "Kindness isn't a credential you print. It's a thing you either recognize or you don't. I almost didn't. That's on me. You," he nodded at Faircloth. "You saw it clear as day, and you tried to bury it because it cost you money. We're done." He drove to Camp Washington that afternoon. No envelope. No lawyer. He found her boxing up the last of the picture books. Because the vote had gone the way the vote was always going to go, and the branch was closing for real now, and Naomi Sinclair looked up from a carton of board books and did not stop what she was doing. "What can I get for you, Mr. Holloway?" she said, flat, the way you talk to a stranger. "I failed you," he said, "and I failed my daughter. I don't have a check. I don't have a contract. I don't have a plan. I've got an apology and one question." She waited. She was good at waiting. "Will you let me earn your trust back?" She set the board books down. She looked at him a long moment, the real look, the one she used to read what people weren't saying. "You don't earn my trust," she said. "Wren does. If that baby still wants me, I'll come. But I set the terms this time, all of them. Not your board, not your lawyer, me. And if anybody ever comes at me again with a file and a photograph, I'm gone, and I do not come back. That won't happen. You said that before." His eyes went to the floor. "I did. You're right. I did." "One chance," Naomi said. "That's what this is." From the returns desk, Estelle Quigley turned away and wiped her face with the back of her hand and would deny to her grave that she'd done it. Naomi rode the bus out to Indian Hill the next afternoon. Same 17, then a transfer, a shoebox in her lap. She walked up the stairs to Wren's too-clean room and sat down on the floor and got out the little keyboard and started to play, soft, that one-octave staircase of notes, and she did not call the child's name. After a while, a shadow came to the doorway. Wren stood there, fingers fluttering, eyes locked on Naomi's hands. She didn't move for a long time. Then she crossed the room and sat down closer than before, and reached behind her and pulled out a drawing wrinkled from being held for days. A brown figure, a yellow bird, a creek stone, gray, drawn careful. She set it in Naomi's lap. Naomi's eyes filled. She pressed her lips together and held it, and Wren opened her mouth. The sound came out rough, unpracticed, like a hinge that hasn't turned in years. Nay, nay me. In the hallway, Spencer Holloway gripped the doorframe with both hands and forgot how to breathe. His daughter had said a name, her first word in 2 years, and it wasn't his. Naomi set the drawing down and opened her arms, slow, no pressure, and Wren leaned in and put her forehead against the old woman's shoulder and stayed there, and Naomi held her light and easy, the way you hold something that has finally, after everything, chosen to stay. You want to know how it all came out. The Camp Washington branch did not close. Spencer Holloway underwrote it, quietly, on the one condition that he never be named on the building. Estelle made him sign something to that effect, in pen. "Because men like you change your minds," she said, and he let her have it. And the two of them have a standing argument now about the temperature of the children's room that neither one wants to win. Music Hour runs 3 mornings a week. The waiting list is long. Naomi Sinclair did not go back to being nobody on the schedule. Spencer talked her into letting him fund a thing she'd given up on 30 years ago. Not a personal check, she wouldn't take that, but a foundation with an application and a board and an essay, the kind of thing she had to be talked into and then ran like she'd been born to. They called it the Obad Project, after the clinic that got stolen from her, and last year it trained 200 caregivers across Ohio in the things no binder teaches: how to read a room, how to slow all the way down, how to meet a child where she actually is, instead of dragging her to where the schedule says she ought to be. There's a tuning fork in the logo. Naomi designed it herself. Margot Steeple does not work in that house anymore. Doctor. Roderick Faircloth's Institute lost its anchor funding, and then its book deal. And the last anybody heard, he was consulting for a wellness company, currently under investigation by the state. And nobody who knew the story was surprised. Wren Holloway is 9 now. She reads at grade level, and she's in a regular classroom with help, and she talks in short, careful sentences, enough to ask for water, enough to say no thank you, enough to say Naomi, come back, every Saturday morning when the old woman gets up to go. She has a best friend named Pearl who likes paper airplanes, which Wren considers structurally inferior to the creekstone collection she keeps on the windowsill, lined up in a careful row, smallest to biggest, restarted whenever one is crooked. Her father comes home by 4 most days. He stepped back to chairman 3 days a week. He told a reporter once that the smartest decision he ever made had nothing to do with money, and then wouldn't explain it, which is the most honest he's ever been in an interview. So here's the part I'll leave you with, and you can do whatever you want with it. 2 years. Not one word. A man spent a fortune, flew in the whole world, did everything you're supposed to do, and his little girl stayed locked behind a door nobody could find the key to. And then an old woman on a city bus, with a tuning fork in her cardigan pocket and a hollow place in her she'd carried 50 years, sat down on the floor and hummed, and the door opened. She almost got run off for it. By a man in a good suit, with a good file, who could prove on paper that she wasn't qualified to do the one thing on God's earth she was put here to do. Picture that's your kid behind that door. Picture you've got the file in your hand and the photograph and the whole nervous board telling you to play it safe. Picture how easy it would be to believe them. Then go find the people in your own life that the world has decided don't count. Look again. Look the way Naomi looks. Because the person holding the key to the locked door is almost never the one with the waterfall in the lobby. It's the one already down on the floor, where the hurting is, humming.